This one blood test can save your life. It's a test that I believe we should all be doing all the time. If we know that inflammation is the underlying cause of all these chronic illnesses, why aren't we testing for ourselves for inflammation all the time, or every 6 months, every year at least? Because there could be indicators, in the blood. We go, oh, okay, my blood's toxic. I need to address that now. And that's why I've got eczema, or that's why I've got psoriasis, or that's why I've got arthritis. There's a few simple blood tests that we can take to determine whether there's inflammation.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Neil Cannon, and we're going to be talking about self-healing and vitality. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can read synopses, see photos of my guests, listen to episodes, a little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Neil Cannon. And we traveled to the UK once more, and so many great people over there doing so much great work. Neil and I talk a lot about inflammation and how that is the cause of many, many conditions, and how we can self-heal, living a vital life. And he's written a book called The Vitality Secret, which he talks about his own journey in overcoming a skin condition that he had for decades that was being treated with antibiotics and topical creams, and he wasn't getting anywhere until he addressed the inflammation in his body. I did not know that there were tests for inflammation, specific tests that he talks about in the episode, and we even talk about epigenetics. So this is a fantastic episode. I loved talking to Neil, and you'll love hearing him. This is Neil Cannon. Neil, it's great to meet you. Thanks for being on the show.
Great to meet you too, Bob. Thank you for having me on your show. It's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I know normally you live in Mexico, but right now you're in Brighton, UK. So is it the UK weather of rain and fog and clouds and all that?
It's pretty much the reason I left the UK right now. It's grey, sideways, rain, and minus several degrees C. So it's I'm looking forward to getting back to Mexico, put it that way.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, which is close to at least in the fall and the winter, like the UK. Very cloudy, and I believe I had some sort of a seasonal depression when I was there, because every time the sun would go away, I would get sad and heavy. And I noticed when I moved to Los Angeles that I felt a lot better. And then on the days that it would get cloudy and, which is rare, I would feel kind of weird and like, that heaviness. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's what this is. I don't know what causes that, but it's, I'm certainly sensitive to it.
They call it seasonal affective disorder, I think. SAD.
Because it's sad.
They've given it a name. Yes, and it's sad. Yeah. And why not label it?
Yeah, so maybe I got it. So I don't know. I feel better when the sun's out. And just
I can totally relate. Yeah, I moved to LA as well myself from England.
Oh, okay. So anytime you want to come back, we'd love to have you.
Thank you.
I control that stuff.
Yeah.
So I know you wrote a book about the secret to vitality, which I think is what. Well, let's first talk about this for a second, because people say they want to have vitality, but there's something about it that is a little bit scary if you're not used to it, to having vitality. In that, am I going to be so vital and active, I'm going to have to do more and like have to rather than want to? I have a little bit of that myself. I'm fairly vital for for, how long I've been around.
Too much energy.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, I won't
Too
be able to
much
handle it.
vitality.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a
I think that's a
psychological.
champagne problem.
It really is. It really is. But when I think about how even half a lifetime ago, I had less vitality than I do now because I was eating poorly. I wasn't exercising. I was drinking. I was doing all this stuff, bloated. I didn't, I was pasty. I didn't feel well. And then when I started to change all that, I realized I could have been even more vital when I was younger than I was. I wasn't really taught any of that stuff. And I'm sure you had a similar situation being raised in the UK, because it's not really known as a center of health. You think, at least for me, yeah. I think of beer and meat and a lot of smoking. This is what I think of when I think of.
That's essentially how I grew up and spent my teenage years and 20s. Yes. And it wasn't until I had my reason to change that I changed myself. And it sounds like you had your reasons to change or make changes, should we say?
Yes. And let's talk about your reason to change. What happened and what was the path that got you to be where you are today?
As I'm sure you're aware, most people who work in holistic health have some kind of personal story of recovery or healing, or they know someone close to them who has suffered from something pretty severe and they've gone down the research train or quest to help them. I come with my own story of self-healing and recovery, and accompanied by my father's stroke, in fact. So I had 30 years worth of eczema for the best part of 30 years, 3 decades, same thing. Since I was a toddler, I had really bad eczema. And the standard of care was steroid creams, which have left pigmentation on my skin. I don't know if you can see that, but it's gone in various places around my body where I used to use these steroid creams all the time. And prescription moisturizers, and when it got really bad, antibiotics, which you might know harm your gut microbiome, particularly when overprescribed, can cause a lot of harm in the gut, the very organ you want to heal. I talk about the gut as being the engine for the body. And if we're destroying it every time with a series of antibiotics, that's not a good thing with a skin condition or any kind of chronic challenge for that matter. So it wasn't until my father suffered a stroke about 10, 11 years ago, when I kind of had my wake-up call, as it were, when I had this kind of inner knowing that his stroke was avoidable. I just thought he did not have to have this stroke. Whatever treatment he's received, I don't think was good enough, because I just had this innate intelligence telling me it didn't have to happen. I'd already written a book on increasing testosterone naturally for guides. And I'd already seen this word inflammation in various books I was researching and documentaries I was watching and interviews I was watching between doctors and experts, and they're talking about this thing called inflammation. And a few years prior to his stroke, I remember him being told he had chronic inflammation. I remember where we were in the family home, we're in the kitchen, he was making tea, and he just said to me, I've got this thing called chronic inflammation. I don't know what it is, but apparently I've got this. And his sister is a naturopathic doctor, my aunt, and she has about 20 letters after her name. She's a very, very bright woman. And she tested his blood and sure enough found chronic inflammation and systemic markers, or markers for systemic inflammation in the blood. So what took place after that? Not a lot, because he didn't make the changes, should we say, that his sister recommended. And there was a lot more that he could have done. And sure enough, I found out that this thing called chronic inflammation, because I went on this research quest and very quickly found out it's the underlying cause of his hypertension, ultimately led to his stroke, and also the asthma he'd had since 12 years old, a fully reversible condition. Most people don't think it is, but it is. And of course, the eczema I'd suffered from for the best part of 30 years. And what I did is I thought, how can I get rid of inflammation? First of all, can I test for it? Yes. How do I get rid of it? Oh, the first place to go to is diet. And that's where most people start with their healing, recovery, vitality journey, whatever you call it. And very quickly, by changing my diet and lifestyle habits, I got rid of my eczema. And since 2015, I've been helping people reverse not just eczema and other skin conditions, but other chronic inflammatory health conditions, which is really everything, using very, very similar principles. And it's all around gut health, but it's really kind of grown, starting with nutrition and exercise and reducing stress and grounding and sunlight, but it's really grown to what I describe as the 4 pillars of vitality, being physical, mental, emotional, and energetic. So it's kind of morphed and grown and expanded for the last 7, almost 8 years now since I've been coaching. So that's my story in a nutshell.
It's a great story. And, you know, that is true. A lot of the people that I certainly interview on this show have come to their research and knowledge based on something that has happened to them. And so when I think about the way you were, the treatments that you were given early on for eczema, 3 years old is pretty young to even have a skin condition, I would imagine. I think a lot of people think that if it's on the skin, it's some sort of coming from the outside, like a bee sting or poison ivy, or, you know, you got something on your skin and now it's infected your skin. They're not, at first, they're not thinking this is coming from the inside out. So creams are going on, steroids, you know, all that kind of stuff you get. And then at some point, I guess the medical community realizes, well, maybe there's an infection of some kind that we need to treat, like you were saying, with antibiotics. But finding the root cause, which in this case, and probably in the cases of most, I don't want to say most, but many conditions, has to do with diet and gut inflammation. This keeps coming up in my podcast, and I'm so happy that you're going to be talking about that, because what are the causes of inflammation? Why are some people more prone to experiencing that? And what are the ways we test? Because that was an interesting thing. What are the tests for that? I'm asking you a lot of questions at once.
Yeah.
Because I get going thinking about it. I'll stop on those questions. I do have more, but go ahead.
So first of all, I just want to tie back to something you just mentioned earlier about food being the cause or the root cause. And I just want to just address that very, very quickly, because I think food is wonderful and it's very, very effective for getting rid of symptoms. But I would rarely say it's the actual cause of the illness. I wouldn't ever say it's the root cause, but I would say that lots of food that we eat is inflammatory. And if one is eating lots of inflammatory foods, then the chances are that the body is going to create symptoms depending on your genetic code. What I've found, for the best part of several years when I started off coaching, was mostly nutrition based, and we cleaned up the diet, and then the body would heal in most cases, but not for everyone. And we'd normally go deeper and deeper. And I'll talk about peeling back the layers of the onion to find out really what the causes of the inflammation are, which comes on to the next question: what causes inflammation? And is that clear for you?
Very clear, and I'm glad I'm glad you clarified that, because the idea that food causes it, I was actually trying to say, you said it much better, that it exacerbates inflammation if you're not eating in a way that is healthy. But there's something else going on there too. So we're going to talk about that for a second.
Yeah. And I think that the reason something else is going on is because, some people can eat the same food types their whole life. I mean, we do have to consider the toxic food supply. That's definitely something to consider. But sometimes people can be living a so-called, healthy diet, and then for the same diet-ish for 20, 30 years, and then suddenly they can't stop. They can't eat the same things anymore. So something else has happened. So normally something happens which makes their gut more sensitive to food types that they were previously able to eat. So what's happened? And that's where we talk about peeling back the layers of the onion. So what normally causes inflammation? Anything that enters the body that the body doesn't recognize can potentially cause inflammation. So absolutely, diet can be inflammatory. If we're eating fake food, anything that's not in alignment with nature, for example, definitely can cause inflammation in the body. If we're eating fried food and foods like chemicals and pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, all that stuff can definitely be inflammatory. And I guess, if someone is super zen and their emotions are balanced, their thoughts are balanced, they've got no trauma, and that's all they're doing different, then absolutely diet can be the root cause, if you will. But I would normally suggest that in most cases, diet isn't the actual root cause. So coming back to your other question, what else can trigger inflammation? If there's anything in the body which is an infection, for example, or mercury in the mouth or infected root canals, something which is going to trigger an inflammatory response. All inflammation is, on a systemic level, is the immune system protecting you from foreign or alien invaders, if you will. And it's a very healthy immune response. If we didn't have it, we would die. So we've got to be grateful for inflammation. But when it happens continuously, chronically, that's when the body's creating symptoms chronically. And depending on your genetic code, it's going to show up as eczema or asthma or diabetes or arthritis or gout or whatever it is. So we just need to be mindful about what we're consuming and what we're exposed to. And if there's anything else in the body that might be really causing a consistent inflammatory response. So there could be things in the environment, for example, triggering inflammation. That you might be living next to a chemical plant, or there could be pesticides in a farm next door just spraying into your face every day. I don't know why I laughed when I said that. I'm just giving a silly example, but that actually does happen sometimes. You could be living by a cell phone tower and with radiation affecting your body, or there could be any number of environmental toxins, if you will, which cause the body to have an inflammatory response. I'll never forget going to the Truth About Cancer Live Symposium in 2016. And there were these talks on electrosmog and electromagnetic radiation. And there were these studies of clusters where people would, in certain small villages, would all get cancer, like a large proportion of those people would get cancer. And then they'd move to a non-cell phone or an area without all the electrosmog. It's not just cell phone towers. It could be an electricity station or something like that, where we're exposed to these electromagnetic fields or electrosmog. Dirty electricity is what it's sometimes called. They'd move and then the cancer would go away. And it's stuck in my head ever since. So we need to be mindful of the environment we're living in, because anything which is going to affect us, I talk about the nature codes and staying in alignment with nature. And if we move away from nature and we're exposed to toxins, whatever they are, then that can potentially cause inflammation.
I wanted you to address the how you test for these things for inflammation, and what are some of the other types of things that people can do besides changing their diet.
So one of the favorites is called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's a blood test. There's many. There's like homocysteine, there's TNF alpha, there's other ones. But the main one I lead with is C-reactive protein, or high sensitivity C-reactive protein. You can ask your doctor for it, or you can pay for it. It's very inexpensive. And I'll never forget Mark Hyman. I'm a huge fan of functional medicine and getting to the cause. And Mark Hyman said, this one blood test can save your life. It's a test that I believe we should all be doing all the time. If we know that inflammation is the underlying cause of all these chronic illnesses, why aren't we testing for ourselves for inflammation all the time, or every 6 months, every year at least? Because there could be indicators, in the blood. We go, oh, okay, my blood's toxic. I need to address that now. And that's why I've got eczema, or that's why I've got psoriasis, or that's why I've got arthritis. There's a few simple blood tests that we can take to determine whether there's inflammation. You can take a microbiome test. You can have a stool sample. You can send off a stool sample now and have that analyzed and see which diet is affecting you, or which foods are affecting you. By the way, if you send off a stool sample, get the kit first. Don't just send it to the company, because that would just be not very well received.
You don't just get a plastic bag and stick it in a pouch.
Yeah, exactly. I heard this is where I just send my stool sample. Yeah, get the kit sent and then send it. But there's some amazing tests now that we can take to determine where the imbalances are in our body. And we can do blood tests, microbiome, we can do bioresonance testing. Bioresonance can pick up mercury in the mouth, and they're pinging off all these frequencies off your skin. So there's so many advances now in technology where we can determine the health of our bodies. It's just that most people aren't doing it. So the thing about inflammation is, if you have a low-level inflammation, you might have a low-level symptom, and I call eczema like a low-level symptom, or at least in my case, it was kind of low-level symptom. I had it I did have it kind of badly, I would say, to a degree, but I didn't have it as badly as others do. Some people have it over their whole bodies, and then they use steroid creams over their whole bodies, and then that leads to topical steroid withdrawal syndrome when their skin becomes dependent on the steroids, and then they stop using them, and then just a giant flaky. It's awful. So when I compare myself with those kind of people, I think I got off lightly, but it was all over my neck and my back and my arms. It did go everywhere, but not to the extent other people have it. Anyway, I do think it's kind of like a low level thing, because when we have these symptoms at this stage, it could be the body's communication with us to take action now before something more serious happens down the line, like a heart attack or a stroke or cancer. All of those start with chronic inflammation. A lot of people talk about how people have heart attacks out of the blue. What if there was a way of testing the body before the heart attack happened out of the blue, or before the cancer diagnosis out of the blue? The more that we monitor our own bodies and we're mindful of what could potentially be causing an inflammatory response, then we're going to stand a much better chance of not having a nasty surprise down the road. So I do think it's worth considering these forms of symptoms like eczema, like asthma, as indicators to take action now. Like, I think of symptoms as warning lights in your car. If your car dashboard starts flashing the oil light, the standard would be, okay, the oil light's flashing. Let's go to the mechanic, fix it at the cause, so the oil light stops flashing. It's not like an invitation to go to an electrician and have the light rewired so it stops flashing. We want to get to the cause. And I kind of associate modern medicine with certain practices. We have to be absolutely mindful and grateful for modern medicine saving lives. It's amazing in emergencies. I call it emergency medicine myself. When it comes to illness and dis-ease, when we're just treating the symptoms, we're not getting to the cause. We're missing the whole point of why the body has created that symptom. And there's a cause. There's always cause, or there's several causes. So it could be some form of major toxin, or it could be some kind of trauma. And it's normally a combination of those two, some kind of toxin, some kind of trauma, when you really start to peel back the layers of the onion.
That blood test you mentioned, I want to ask you again, that Mark Hyman talked about. I know who that is. He's got a terrific podcast that my daughter turned me on to. He's really great. What is that blood test, and does insurance cover that?
It really depends on your insurance. I'm from the UK, and I've worked with a lot of people in the States, but sometimes their insurance covers it, sometimes it doesn't. So I just say, ask your doctor first, or ask your insurance company first. If they cover it, great. Otherwise, just pay for it. It's less than $50 for one test.
Oh, okay.
So high sensitivity reactive protein, HSCRP is how it's often written down. It's and again, what I would normally say is ask your doctor for an inflammatory marker panel or an inflammation test, because it comes often with other tests at the same time.
I'm writing this down. That's why I'm not talking for a second.
I just thought you were scrolling through social media or something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I just did a thing on multitasking with this other guest. And we were talking about the inefficiency of multitasking, how there actually is no such thing. It's just you're shifting attention quickly.
Task switching.
Yeah. So you're not really doing two things at once. You're doing a bunch of stuff poorly.
Yeah. I did for years. I had a blog on how to focus the mind, and I discovered how the brain isn't an octopus. We're not meant to be multitasking. And we're task switching when we multitask. And just like you say, we're underperforming in every one of them if we constantly task switching. There's a study at Harvard, actually, that said chronic multitaskers become forgetful. They start leaving their keys in places. They just start doing silly things when they wouldn't be doing that if they weren't multitasking all the time. Anyway,
I have this discussion with my wife, who says that if you're a mom, you have to be a multitasker.
Oh, yes.
And I understand that there's so much stuff going on at the same time. Yeah.
Yes, I think, in fact, I wrote about this in my latest book. I think if you have a job that requires multitasking, it's almost like intentional multitasking. And I think mothers and parents definitely multitask like that in an intentional way.
Now, I was reading in your some of your information about reversing chronic illnesses. What are some of the examples that you've seen in your work yourself, and how you go about that with people?
Yeah, so I've helped people with skin conditions like eczema and acne and rosacea, psoriasis, arthritis, gout, fibromyalgia, chronic pain. One person actually reversed symptoms of Parkinson's by we weren't even focusing on Parkinson's, we were focusing on type 2 diabetes. And she embarked upon an anti-inflammatory protocol. It was actually mostly the ketogenic diet, actually. It had a massive effect on the Parkinson's symptoms. I can't say like she could cured it, for example, but it had a remarkable shift. If we just think of any kind of illness or dis-ease, any label of a chronic condition, it's normally a chronic symptom of an underlying cause. When you really start to peel back the layers of the onion, underneath all of this, what's caused the gut to weaken and weaken and weaken is normally some form of trauma. And, a lot of us are aware of how chronic stress can cause illness. It's a real thing. Like 90% is often a figure that's spoken about as chronic stress causing illness. It's, I would say, what's underneath it? What's causing the stress in people's body? And it's normally the trauma. In my own podcast, I have this weird obsession with interviewing people who reverse really incurable things. So advanced stages of cancer, multiple sclerosis, lupus, fibromyalgia, and there's various illnesses that some would, or type 1 diabetes. Some things are considered irreversible. And I've got two podcast interviews on multiple sclerosis. And I love interviewing people to find out what they have done to reverse whatever symptom it is, because I detect a theme across all of them. Like the protocols are very, very similar, because ultimately they're addressing what's causing their symptom. And we're all kind of biologically the same, really. Yes, there are different diets for different people and different exercises for different people. Yes, there are differences, but for the most part, we're built the same. And we're a giant cluster of cells that require feeding. And if we're going to get toxic, it's going to be a major problem. If we're deficient in cell fuels, that's going to be a big problem. So take out the toxins, put the fuel back in, balance the gut, and really find out what the major toxins are and the major traumas are. A lot of people can have pretty amazing results.
Yeah, the mind is just incredible. And, it can create things and it can change them. In ways that are not believed by a lot of people. I'm just thinking, as you were mentioning many of those conditions, a lot of those are in my family and relatives. My mother had fibromyalgia and arthritis. My dad had Parkinson's. I had a cousin who had MS. And I always wondered, like, particularly with my mom's fibromyalgia, that just seemed like something that was caused not from the outside. Like, you don't catch it; it's created. And I was just thinking about, actually, let's talk about this person that reversed the MS, or to a degree where they were, I guess, functioning pretty well. What was the root cause of that in that particular case? Because that's a very serious condition that is, it's crippling.
In both interviews, the first interview is my very first interview, was with a woman who reversed her MS, and I met her at Burning Man. And I wouldn't be able to say what the absolute cause was for her, because I don't know if she'd found it back then. But all I knew was she had cleaned up her diet in a massive way and was addressing every angle of health and getting remarkable results. She went on a very strict anti-inflammatory protocol. So it was diet mostly, but it wasn't just diet. And she shrunk a legion in her brain in 3 months by changing what she was eating. And that was accompanied by meditation. And that was accompanied by exercise. And that was accompanied by sunlight. And that was accompanied by grounding. It's normally all of the things. And I don't know if that point, if she had done, for example, applied kinesiology to find out where the trauma was, where it started, because normally Normally with these kind of conditions, you mentioned fibromyalgia. When someone says chronic pain or fibromyalgia, these are two conditions where the Western medical approach doesn't really have any solutions. They don't even give you drugs sometimes. They might give you antidepressants or painkillers. But it's really misunderstood, I would say. And when anyone says fibromyalgia or chronic pain, the first thing I always think of is trauma. And I immediately thought of when you said fibromyalgia, I will never forget. I've experienced quite a few ayahuasca ceremonies, plant medicine ceremonies and psychedelics. And I'll never forget this one woman in an ayahuasca ceremony saying she healed her fibromyalgia that she'd had for 2 decades in 3 sittings of ayahuasca, because the ayahuasca helps to rewire the trauma. It actually helps the brain to heal from the traumas. And you can even have an experience in the journey which helps to heal the trauma as well. So there's a number of ways, many ways to skin a cat. I hate that saying, but I keep on saying it. There's lots of ways to address trauma. I'm not saying psychedelics is for everyone and it comes with risks. There's more simple ways of doing it. But yeah, MS, coming back to your question, how did they do it? Did they get to the cause? With the first interview, I don't know if she ever got to the absolute cause, but I suggest it is trauma. And the second person, she just went on a very strict anti-inflammatory protocol. Both of them had a very similar. They went paleo. Some people do grain-free, which is, well, paleo is typically grain. Well, it always is grain-free, very clean, anti-inflammatory, organic everything, no pesticides, no fungicides, herbicides, insecticides, nothing fake, nothing fried, micronutrients, take out the nightshades, and a lot of results can be done or achieved by going paleo. And also some people do it vegan and grain-free vegan, and there's lots of ways to do it. But it just so happens that the 2 people who reversed MS, they both did the paleo approach, and they followed an autoimmune protocol. And I'll always say it's not just diet. It's just one of the fastest ways that people get results. And then it's normally accompanied with other stuff at the same time. That's the true holistic approach. It's addressing the whole. I was recently at a Dr. Joe Dispenza advanced retreat in Cancun in December. And I'd met 2 people who had come out of wheelchairs. And the person I was sat next to, there was a young woman, 21, and she said at the last event, she had got rid of 11 allergies that she'd had for 10 years. And I said, 10 years, what happened 10 years ago? Did you have quite a big event? Was it traumatic? I don't even think I said traumatic. I said, was that a big year for you? And she said, that was a big year. Lots of stuff was going on that year. And she kind of paused and she went, no one's asked me that question. And I said, most illness is actually rooted in trauma. That's what causes it. And it causes trauma is like stored like electromagnetic bundles of energy in the body. There's a slogan that says the organs weep the tears the eyes refuse to shed. Well, it's a quote, actually. It's not a slogan. It's William Osler, father of modern medicine. Brilliant guy. And the way I see it is she transmuted the energy which was associated with those memories 10 years prior to this event. And she'd done that in probably one session or a series of sessions over the course of a week. So when we peel back the layers of the onion, we normally get to the cause, and it just requires finding the right practitioner or a number of practitioners to find out how can I get to the cause, how can I release the cause.
You're talking mostly about emotional trauma then.
Yeah, I would say most illness is rooted in emotional trauma.
Did you ever explore what happened with you at 3 years old that started did that ever come up for you?
Yes, that has come up with me, and I've done some work around that. I've done a lot of trauma release. It's sometimes it can be 1 or 2 sessions, and it can be a series of sessions. The way I see it, if we're walking, talking human breathing, if we're walking, talking, breathing human, we've got trauma. We've sustained levels of trauma during our lives, and it could be in the holistic space, we call it little t, big T, little trauma, big trauma. It could be as small as an argument with a sibling or a parent when you're 5 years old, or it could be something more severe. And I've not personally worked with anyone, but I've of like a really severe trauma, like a rape. But I've seen and witnessed women go through their trauma release and have remarkable results by addressing that and releasing it from the body. My traumas, thankfully, weren't that severe. And, I don't need to go into them, but let's just say I did a lot of trauma release over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so. And also before that, it was emotional intelligence tools to really create new meaning for stuff that's happened to me in the past. I attended a number of Tony Robbins events, for example, where they really help you to create new meaning for the past and for our suffering, and to put you in an empowered state. And I've saw and witnessed incredible transformations in people who had endured things way more severe than I have ever endured.
I've experimented with so many different things that I've, some of the stuff I have not is I haven't done EMDR, which seems to be a fairly popular one, but I have some friends that have, and they've had tremendous results. But I did some Reikian therapy, not Reiki, not REIKI, but
I saw that on your website. Yeah.
And that was sort of based on the body stores trauma in different places. And one of the things they do is put you in a sort of uncomfortable position that stresses a certain part of the body. And then they rub that part of the body really hard, and it releases these, emotions, really. And I remember just being, sobbing and making animal-like noises. I couldn't control it once it started. And then having memories, almost like visions as it was going on. I was aware, but I was also having this experience, and it was super valuable to do. I don't know too many people that actually are practitioners of that, but I would love to do it again. I think it was a really powerful experience. And I've done a bunch of these sort of, I don't know what you would call them, seminars, workshops, experiences, to better myself, different types of things, probably similar to what Tony Robbins type stuff. So I'm doing this one workshop, and we were in these little groups, and it was about 4 or 5 of us, and it was designed to get people to really release. And there was a young woman there who had this, I guess she had gotten this big sore on her lip as the first day or so of this thing was going on. And we did this exercise, and we literally had to kind of hold her down a little bit, because she was, flailing and weeping and crying. And she screams out, "I was raped." She just screams it out, right?
Wow.
She starts sobbing, and we're holding her, and we're really supporting this woman. So a powerful experience. She gets up, the thing is gone. The sore on her mouth was gone. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. Gone. And
wow. I do believe it. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I wouldn't have believed it if somebody told me, but I actually saw it happen.
Yeah.
And, I watched it happen right in front of me. And I remember looking at this other guy we were doing, two of the people and we looked at each other like, did this just happen? And it did. So that was sort of the moment. And that was about, I don't know, 25 years ago that this happened. And I was like, there's more going on with emotion than any of us even know, or at least that I had thought of at the time.
Yeah, that's remarkable. And I totally believe it. Spontaneous remissions, if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, I mentioned him earlier. Are you familiar with that name?
I know who Joe Dispenza is, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So people have attended his retreats. They don't have to attend the retreats, but there's something about the energy in the room that it's just like a catalyst of amazing energy. People have attended these retreats and really tapped into the quantum realm, the quantum field, whatever word you want to use, meditating ultimately, completely changing their biology, creating a lot of brain and heart coherence, and really embodying their principles, lost spiritual principles, believe it or not, which have been around for thousands of years, since the beginning of time, but we just don't know about them. He's just created this, he has created this incredible environment where people can embody these principles and really understand us as energy beings. We can transmute the trauma. We can create visualizations for what we want to bring into our lives and become the energy of that person, and really embody these principles that have been around for thousands of years. So I'm tying that into what you just said about that person getting rid of that symptom like that. That this is the kind of thing people are doing, almost repeated, well, not the same person, but you can go to an event and you'll hear of these spontaneous remissions as the event goes on. It's the kind of thing you'd think of as miracles, but when we start to understand the technology, or rather the process that people are, the formula, if you will, it becomes a technology because it's repeatable. And it's like, hey, do this, 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 and this, and this. But it's really about embodying it and understanding us as energy beings, and understanding that energy, we are mostly energy, 99.999, many nine nines, empty space and energy, and 0.001 matter. We're mostly energy when we zoom in enough to determine how much we are energy and matter. So when we start thinking of us as energy beings, that's when it gets clearer to understand what trauma is, because trauma it's stored as electromagnetic energy. And you mentioned how it's trapped in organs. The moment we think of ourselves as energy beings, not these intelligent meat robots, we are energy. And if we understand that trauma gets trapped, how do we release it? Oh, look, now my symptoms gone away. I'm simplifying it, but that's ultimately what people are achieving. They're tapping into this profound energy, which we are a part of, this intelligence that created us, and this thing called love. And we are tapping into our heart's intelligence and an incredible force and light that is creating healing very, very fast. And it's just remarkable. And there is so much potential for us all that we've just barely touched this. We've barely scratched the surface of what's available to us.
I'm glad you mentioned that heart intelligence, and there's gut intelligence. It's not just brain intelligence, emotional intelligence. There's so many types of systems going on in the body that certainly Western medicine doesn't understand yet, like you say, or doesn't even want to look at. I was wondering about things that are considered genetic conditions. I have a genetic eye condition, a retinal genetic condition that's slowly progressing, not in the way that I want it to. And so I basically have assumed, and maybe incorrectly, that there's not much I can do about that. And it's, I've had genetic tests on it, and it's definitely something that's there. So can those things, which seem to be, in my mind, impossible to do anything about because you're born with those genetics, is that being looked at in some new way too?
Yes, in short. So are you familiar with the science of epigenetics?
Well, I've heard of it and I don't really understand it. And I kind of, keep going on that, because I don't, I just assume I know nothing.
This will give you hope, I hope. So the science of epigenetics is really how the environment in the body is what determines the expression of our genes. So epi means above and genes is below. So epi is like the software and genes is the hardware. So epigenetics is like the software running the hardware. So we know that in more than 95% of the population, that we are in control of our gene expression by the environment that we keep in our bodies. And that could be from what we're eating, what we're exposed to, our thoughts, our emotions, how we perceive our world, believe it or not. All of these aspects affect our environment and our body, which then affects our genes. So what we also know is that in less than about 5% of the population, I believe it's even smaller now, with all the data they're picking up over the last couple of decades, there is a small proportion of the population that is born with a so-called defective gene, which is often termed as fully penetrant, which means that we don't really have the power to influence that gene, and it's just going to express in whichever way it needs to. So that's not to say that it's not reversible. It just often means that we can't stop it happening. So for the most part of the population, if you come from a family of cancer or diabetes, or the vast majority of what we typically call genetic diseases, if we do exactly the same as what our parents did, and we follow the same habits, same emotions, same thought, same habits of behavior, same diet, that kind of thing, yes, the chances are we could develop what is in our genetic makeup, or rather predisposed to have or experience. However, I've got one parent had cancer, another parent had cardiovascular strokes. That doesn't give me any fear whatsoever, because I know about inflammation, and I know about getting to the cause of illness, and I know about symptoms, and I know about the body. I know it's a remarkably powerful self-healing machine. And it's not just a self-healing machine. We're capable of so much more than most people ever realize. So in your case, I would say, without knowing you or doing anything, any testing or any of that kind of medical opinion, all I would say is, even if you're one of the very few percent that has a true defective or fully penetrant gene, I believe there is still potential to stop it in its tracks, reverse it, signal new genes in new ways, because of what I've seen. Mm-hmm. There's even at Joe Dispenza, I'm going to bring him up again. I should just be his raving fan. What I would like to say, by the way, is he's teaching quantum principles. It's not just him doing it, and there's many ways of doing it. I mean, really, the actual principles are the same, and you don't have to attend a Joe Dispenza event. But what I would say is read Becoming Supernatural, or one of his books, to just understand the science of it, because I think he's one of the best in terms of how to explain these principles, as well as Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote The Biology of Belief, and The Honeymoon Effect and other ones. And I refer to him as like the father of epigenetics, because he was cloning stem cells in the 60s, I think, before it became cool. Some people would say it's dangerous to give people false hope, but I think it's just a great idea to embody the principles and have no expectation, don't be attached to the outcome, but just start to embody the principles, and guess what? Something might happen. Yeah. That's one of the teachings, and it's like feeling the energy of whatever it is that we want to become or achieve or heal or whatever, without getting attached to the outcome. I believe the body is a superbly remarkably powerful self-healing machine.
If people want to get a hold of you, and I know you do a lot of work online helping people, and you're heading to Mexico soon.
My main website is vitalitysecret.com. So my last book is called The Vitality Secret. That's available on Amazon. But the easiest way is to just come to the central hub, which is vitalitysecret.com. And you can also access my podcast there, where people are, I've interviewed people who reverse many, many different things. That's called the Vitality Secret Podcast. And I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram, for example, on Neil Cannon Vitality, but I don't want to give so many links that it becomes overwhelming. I would say the main hub, vitalitysecret.com.
Yeah, and then from there you can
exactly.
You can tentacle out into
yes,
the world of Neil Cannon.
Yes. Thank you. Tentacle out. I've never heard that one. I like it. Yeah.
So people can do actual sessions with you online.
I do private coaching. I've got group coaching. So yes, and this is all remote. I've been working remotely for almost 8 years now. Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing. I love this, because it gives people access to things never before imaginable. It's global, and it's instant. It's unbelievable. I'm just so happy to be alive in this era. I think it's just incredible that what I've learned just in a couple of years doing this podcast, and the people I've met, and think about how many people you're able to help with. It's just incredible.
I think we're living in really exciting times. There's so much available to us that we just weren't aware of before.
Thanks so much for being on the show. And I'm going to check out your podcast. I didn't know about it till I was contacted about you. So I'm fascinated with that kind of stuff. So you've got a new subscribing fan. How about that?
Wonderful. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you. I'd love to hear your feedback.
Okay, great.
The last two are brilliant. I mean, they're all brilliant, actually. But the last few, I guess every time I publish them, I just think this is so great. And the last two particularly are interesting because they really go into the quantum. One guy was a friend of mine. He's 80. He reversed declining eyesight and also paralysis. He was told he'd never walk again. And he applied the principles of the quantum before he even knew about the likes of Joe Dispenza. He was in the human potential movement. Someone else who was told he had 4 months to live if he didn't operate. And he said, well, I'm not going to operate. And he went about healing the cause, and he was in remission in 4 months. So there's some really cool episodes there where people can feel more empowered about the body's incredible abilities. Yeah.
Okay, folks, you've heard it right from the mouth of Neil Cannon.
Oh,
Have a fantastic day. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure, Bob. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been a really fun and interesting conversation.
Thank you. Much appreciation for you folks listening in to The Exploding Human. Check out the website, which is theexplodinghuman.com. You can listen on YouTube at The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Big thanks to Neil Cannon. Check him out. You can visit him on the web and even book an appointment. Have a fantastic day.